Look like I'm addicted to hosting panel discussions. But it's fantastic to be back here again to talk about a subject that's very close to our heart and is just a really great opportunity to bring together some fantastic speakers to discuss in more detail. So I know Winnie's sort of introduced as a top line, but I'd like to just say a little bit more about my panellists before we get going. So if we start with Sharon at the end, Sharon Lloyd Barnes, who's the Commercial Director and Inclusion Lead at the Advertising Association. She's run magazine and sales teams across London and New York before co-founding the Drive partnership, which is a consultancy working with businesses across a range of sectors. And outside of work, and I think this is an example of Sharon putting her money very much where her mouth is, she co-founded a school for autistic children in 2000, which is now called Beyond Autism, and that serves many, many children across different boroughs of London, which is wonderful. Also joined here in the studio by Sarah Jenkins, the Managing Director of Saatchi and Saatchi in London. Sarah joined in December 2019, so just a little bit before the pandemic, and works alongside Sam Hawkey, the Chief Executive Officer, to shape the strategic direction of the agency and drive the day-to-day business. She has spent time at Grey, London, where she was the Chief Marketing Officer and Head of Account Management, and she's been involved in some of the agency's most creative accounts, for example, the British Heart Foundation and LucasAid. She's worked in global network agencies, she's worked in startups, and across organisations as diverse as Mars, GSK, P&G, and the Home Office as well. We hear about that. And she is a staunch believer in the need for greater diversity of talent. So, and I know she's been a big driving force in the industry-wide advertising diversity task force. So it's wonderful to have you here.
Thank you.
And as Winnie said, due to the power of the internet, we also have Gen Kobayashi from Engine joining us, which is fantastic too. Gen is a really forward-thinking strategist. He's worked in both media and creative agency roles. He started life as a comms planner, working at network agencies such as Mindshare and also independent agencies like Good Stuff. He's then moved into account planning and brand strategy, agencies such as Adam and Eve, DBB. And he's also been most recently at Ogilvy, where he's the head of strategy for 5 years. He's now the Chief Strategy Officer at Engine Creative, where he's responsible for leading one of London's most diverse set of strategic minds. And I know he's hugely passionate about this topic too. So we are going to have a fantastic discussion, I'm sure. And as Winnie said, please do feel free to pop your questions in the chat. I have some of my own that I will be selfishly asking, but we're absolutely open to the audience asking questions too. So, let's start with All In, because that really is the key, focus of what we want to talk about. And All In is a fantastic collaboration across the industry with a vision to really stop talking and drive change around inclusion and diversity. Sharon, could you just start with the beginning of that journey? Sort of how did that come about, that vision for All In?
From the outset, it's always been a sort of an industry collaboration, which I think is probably why it's been so successful. It started out as a sort of conversation between the three of the big trade bodies. Mm-hmm. So the Advertising Association, where I am, we kind of represent all the stakeholders in the industry, to be honest. And then the IPA, who look after the agencies, and ISBA, who represent the brands. And from the outset, it was, we need to collate all the D&I initiatives that are going on so we can amplify them, because there seemed to be a lot of sort of duplication of effort, a lot of reinventing the wheel. And quite slow progress. Mm-hmm. So we felt best placed to kind of create this hub. And it was pretty much weeks after founding the first working group to develop this hub that we thought the data thing came up about actually our ambitions are much more than just having a showcase. If we could get industry to engage in an action plan, we could really drive some change here. So that's where it was born. And we had no idea it would be as successful in the first year as it has been. But I think it was that kind of collaboration from the outset that helped.
Yeah, and we were absolutely delighted to be your data partner on that as well. It's just been a fantastic opportunity for us and the team to work with you guys. Sarah, I think you were actually, as part of your work in the diversity task force, you're one of the people who sort of identified that need for the all-in census data. I mean, what was driving that from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a huge fan of data. I mean, diversity and inclusion is what's going to power up so many organisations and future-proof them. And yeah, the data has to be at the heart of any solutions that we're leading into, because we don't have the data, we can't really understand the problem. And diversity is quite often, almost so often, is invisible. There's no way we can just work out who's the diverse talent or where our challenges are. So yeah, data is an imperative. And what I love about the all-in census is it lets us understand at an industry level where our challenges are and opportunities. And when you've got macro challenges, you get macro solutions. When you get macro solutions, everything's going to move quicker. But then as a leader of an agency, I can also see a dashboard for what I can do differently and what I can control. So brilliant initiative, and yeah, amazing job by everyone involved to get it off the ground in year one. And massive thank you to Kantar, because how you managed to power through all that data so quickly. Amen. We've got some really interesting findings for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. And we, you know, the team was super proud and engaged to work on it, and we were super proud to be involved. So thank you for that. And again, if I can come to you, I know Engine really embraced the census. You had a good uptake from the agency as well. How was the study received on the ground with you guys in Engine?
Well, I mean, it's hugely welcomed, and I have to say, you know, it's great to be here on this panel actually. And SJ, I remember you standing up at the diversity task force and calling for the industry and rallying the industry to get to this point. So it's an amazing achievement, and I think actually, you know, again, Kantar, thank you for making it happen. In terms of how it's been received, I think it's another urgent kick up the backside really for everyone. And I think it's you know, for any strategic problem, as we know, you can't start solving a strategic problem until until you properly diagnose the problem. And I think, as SJ was saying, I think a macro problem like this needs a macro solution. And I think, you know, it's the census. We obviously we've been carrying out our own internal surveys, but it really helps to get a proper macro view of the industry, and we can't move forward until we've got that. So it's been hugely welcomed, but it's, you know, it's very much an urgent need for change.
And that leads me beautifully, thank you again, to my next question, which is really, Sharon, we've talked about the census. Can you just give us the headline? What are the kind of key things you found?
Well, I'll pick out the three areas where we've decided to focus action on, because I should have said before, I mean, the key part of this was to have an action plan attached to it. I think the reason we got so much engagement from industry was because, you know, it was a big question, what are you going to do with the data? And the fact that we actually put together an action plan which we published with the findings was sort of crucial to its success. So the three areas, and again, we're just going through three at a time. It's a phased action plan. It's an incredible amount of data that we're going through. Black talent had some of the most shocking statistics, I suppose. So we represent, against UK working population, okay. I mean, we're actually sort of sitting alongside UK working population for Black and Asian talent, but it dramatically drops at C-suite. And the most shocking stat was that 32% of Black talent are likely to leave the industry because of a lack of inclusion. So for us, that was, you know, okay, that's number one. That's an area that we've got to focus on. The other two were disability and people from working class backgrounds. We underrepresent for disability at 9% versus 14% in the UK working population. But also there is an issue with experience. Although 72% of disabled people say that they're treated fairly in their organisation, shockingly, they're twice as likely, people that identify as disabled are twice as likely to be talked over in meetings, to be undervalued or feel undervalued, and even bullied. So it's sort of across the board, it's quite shocking. So there's a piece around representation and experience. And then for working class talent, again, low representation, 19% against 39% of the UK working pop. And you know, interestingly, as an industry, I think we all knew this anecdotally, we obsessed with university graduates. So we really index highly. We've got 72% of the industry have a degree against 48% of the UK working population. So, you know, that obviously impacts the social mobility piece. So they're the three areas that we've pulled out for sort of initial focus. And we've got one call to action against each of those for industry.
That's fantastic. Thanks. That's a really great sort of top line view. And so I know you're a really big believer in data and its ability to sort of help companies set targets and measure. Could you say a bit more about that? How do you think companies should be doing that? What's the best practice from your perspective?
As with all things, put proper time and attention behind it. It's not something that you should be delegating down. This is a C-suite level conversation, and as leaders, we need to take accountability for it. Same way that we measure our commercial imperatives, we should look at our talent imperatives as well. So it's a leadership conversation. We should be benchmarking against national population, as Sharon said, but really we should be benchmarking against the London population.
Yeah.
Over 40% of people in London at the moment would identify themselves as Black, Asian, minority ethnic. They're the sort of benchmarks that we're looking at Saatchi and Saatchi at the moment. We know over 50% of our entry level are women. We've got to make sure that over 50%, or at least 50% of our C-suite are women, so we're not losing great women in their 30s. So different benchmarks. There are personal soft benchmarks. We do our own engagement survey, so being able to make sure that we're measuring, I can bring myself to work. It's a really important benchmark for us to make sure we're making the progress that we want to. And I think really importantly, you've got to tell people what your benchmarks are. The more public you can get with what your commitments are, the more likely you're going to hold yourself accountable. And then finally, there are no silver bullets. We may end up going backwards before we go forwards, but we've just got to lean into that and accept it, and accept that there might be some very embarrassing conversations we have to have about things like gender pay gap, because it's a volatile metric. It's a piece of data that it's a hard thing to shift quickly, but we've got to keep leaning into those hard data points.
I think that uncomfortable conversations point is critical with this area, isn't it? And if we don't make ourselves uncomfortable around some of the topics, we don't make progress, do we? It's really absolutely critical. And it's interesting because you just touched on the point about sort of the 50-50 male-female split, and then how that works as you progress through an agency. Sharon, I know talent retention was a key thing that you guys uncovered. We uncovered with you. What's your views on that? Was it important? How does it impact?
Well, initially our conversation when we started the working group a year or so ago was we know we need to promote the industry more widely as a career. And we thought that was the problem, because we thought it was all about recruitment. Let's just advertise literally to more diverse groups, then we'll have a more diverse workforce. But clearly what's come out in the stats across the board, I mean, we haven't touched, I focused on the 3 that are in the action plan, but across age, gender, LGBTQ+, there are issues with experience, and that's what we want to focus on initially. And so retention, retaining the talent we've got is a business savvy thing to do anyway. But yeah, it's clearly shown in the data that that's where we need to prioritise action.
And again, if I can turn to you actually, because I know at Engine you've really got a sort of a strong learning and support culture, and you really try and help people feel comfortable in changing their paths as they go along potentially. How do you feel like that's impacted your retention levels, and what role does that play in keeping people, do you think?
Yeah, I think Engine, we firmly believe that in order to retain our best talent, we really need to create the conditions whereby people can feel like they can bring their true selves to work. And I think as part of that, it means allowing people to feel comfortable in being open about trying new things and putting themselves in new directions. I think especially today, we talk a lot about how increasingly younger people in the industry don't necessarily see their career paths as vertically aligned as we all used to when we first started out in our careers. And I think it can be slightly more horizontal now. So we're really proud that we've been developing this sort of strong learning culture. And that means creating conditions for people to feel confident and comfortable, to be able to put their hands up and say, look, I want to stretch myself in new directions, new fields of expertise. For example, our latest I network, our latest inclusion network was spearheaded and set up by our head of creative technology, Kim, who passionately believes in neurodiversity, and she's been fighting for that, and she set that up off her own back, and we supported her, or even down to kind of I suppose craft and the kind of practicalities of the work. So we've got a creative director who is very passionate about becoming a film director, and we've been supporting him in his journey and helping him get his short film direction career off the ground. And I think that those conditions are essential, I think, in just any healthy business today. Being able to retain your best talent is to allow them to push themselves into any new direction they want.
And I mean, and that really builds on your point earlier, Sarah, about that metric around, I can bring my whole self to work. It just absolutely speaks to that, doesn't it? And again, actually, and we've obviously just been talking about retention, but to turn ourselves to recruitment for a moment, I know you guys have looked at a sort of a bit of an overhaul of your recruitment approaches at Engine. Could you just talk a little bit about that, how inclusion and diversity has played a role there?
Yeah, so over the last sort of couple of years, the agency, I mean, in the old days, if you had an internal kind of, I suppose, talent acquisition team that sat within the HR team or a central team of people that looked after recruitment within agencies, they tend to be, they tended to have just come from a recruitment background, and they tend to have their primary role to be the agency sort of headhunters, if you like, that sit internally within the team. But we've looked to really kind of, I suppose, change the role of our talent partners that sit internally within Engine. So whilst absolutely they've got a core skill of recruitment, we know that isn't enough anymore. So we've been closing that gap by kind of bringing D&I strategy into our recruitment approach. So it's not seen as something that we bolt on after the fact. It's actually there at point of need. So once the recruitment brief has been written, or the role has been developed and kind of signed off, if you like, we've been combining D&I strategy with recruitment strategy at the very beginning of that process. And we feel very passionately about that being the future of how agencies handle talent acquisition is very much D&I baked into that same role as well.
That's fantastic. And Sarah, I know Saatchi and Saatchi have celebrated 50 years as a name. Congratulations. It's quite an achievement, isn't it? But I know it's prompted you guys to reflect on this talent strategy you need in place to be, as successful 50 years from now as well. Can you say a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, turning 50, the temptation as an ad agency to talk about past glories was a great one.
I bet.
But we absolutely wanted to make it about what's the next 50 years and how can we future-proof our agency. So that's what we were doubling down on. As soon as you start talking about talent and the future, because we are only talent at the end of the day, ad agencies, you very quickly get to diversity as one of the biggest sort of opportunities for us to get right for the agency. We set 5 very clear principles, and I think, as with all things, get a framework, treat it as rigorously as we would do any of our clients' problems. So there's a 5-pillar framework: leadership-led, as I mentioned before, it's as important as any commercial metric. Our diversity metrics are leadership-led, agency-built. We're super lucky. We've got really, really creative, smart people in the building. Their ideas and solutions will be brilliant ones. And they've got lived experiences that they can project into our ideas. Measurable, really critical. Is it working? Is it not working? Why is it working? Sustainable, get better over time. And the 5th one, which hopefully for anyone listening, please lean in, because it's about being open. So what will you learn? What can you steal? What can you hack? Because that's where we'll get change really quickly. So against those 5 principles, again, as Glenn says, retention's so important. Did a lot with working parents off the back. But the thing I'm personally super invested in is our pipeline approach, because we know our industry is phenomenal. It's such a meritocratic industry. You don't need to have had 5 years engineering degrees, etc. You genuinely, your raw talent will power you up. But what are we doing to tell kids that we exist? What are we doing to get them in the door? And then how are we getting rid of some of these fundamental barriers, like expensive cities like London, and how you can afford to live? So got our framework, we've identified our barriers, we've got 3 wicked initiatives, super proud of. Saatchi Ignite, which is our schools programme. So that's a 7-year commitment. So we're not just popping in and getting the kids excited. It's a 7-year commitment, year 7 to year 13. We do curriculum-based learning, which is amazing. We go in and we teach creativity through all subjects, business studies, English through to maths. We're doing career, so we obviously do career counselling and mentoring, and also we're doing work in the community. So the kids are coming up with some really big, terrifying problems, but we're able to use creativity to help lean into them. So really injecting creativity into these kids. So that's our schools programme. We've got Saatchi Open, so re-engineered our approach to entry level to make so you don't need a degree, you don't need to be really articulate, you just need to have that raw talent of creativity that you come through. It's a very pastoral process, not the normal boot camps from like 10 years ago. And then we've got Saatchi Home. So we work with an incredible organisation called the London Hospital Association. They've got an incredible footprint of accommodation, and we work with them. We've got a subsidised rate now, which means that we can pass that subsidy on to our entry level and even give free accommodation to interns. So yeah, really, I'm super excited. Some great things that are now live and happening and we're learning from.
Yeah, and I mean, we talked before in preparation for the panel, and those things really stuck with me, in particular the hostel one. I don't know, could you just say a little bit more about how that one in particular works, Sarah? Because that really did strike me as quite a different way of looking at tackling a challenge.
Yeah, and I I was so lucky. Bank of Mum and Dad just looked after me when I first graduated on our entry level salaries, and you just realise how much that would turn kids off, not just the practical level, but you move to London and who am I going to even know?
Yeah.
How am I going to feel comfortable? How do I even get to work? How much is a cheap cost? All that stuff. So recognise it was a big problem. Really lucky. Someone, have conversations. Someone mentioned the fact that the London Hostel Association, brilliant organisation. It's a charity. As I said, they've got an incredible property footprint, very safe spaces, very secure. It's got gyms inside, there's communal spaces, but any residents have got their own space as well. So they've got the independence, and we're slowly being able to build a little proper homes. We've got 3 people in there at the moment, and hopefully more to come. So the power of experts is just you cannot get enough great experts in this space. They needed our investment of time and money, and we needed their property. So you're going to get into a value exchange super quick.
A happy marriage.
A very happy marriage. A very happy marriage.
And I was interested as well. I mean, the program you guys are doing with schools again, it sounds absolutely fantastic. You mentioned some big challenges that you guys have come together with the children to help look at. Can you talk a bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, God, we were like working under lockdown going, aren't we good at this? And then you go into a school environment on Microsoft Teams, you're like, how do teachers do this? It's insane. And yeah, we did literally a 20-minute assembly, and then they all just span off into their tutor groups and came back with probably over 100 ideas across 3 year groups, from too many pigeons in the playground to really dangerous roundabouts, and then onto some super serious conversations we then subsequently had across a few Bosset workshops, where unfortunately they actually lost a member of the school to a knife crime while we were working with them, and able to sort of take all that fear and energy and frustration and be able to point it at a solution and use their thoughts and their creativity. So cathartic and practical, and we'll be working long term again, not silver bullet for the school or for the teachers, but the fact that they understand that there are ways of us using creativity to educate and keep the kids safe. So and it's honestly, anyone can do this. Go into a school, make a proper commitment. Like Kantar, the stuff you guys could do with data in these schools would be phenomenal. So proper investment, work with the assistant principals, build a program, and get stuck in, and we get so much back from it. It feels like such a selfless act. We are getting, every time anyone goes to the school, they come back going, I love it, I want to go every day. We're like, you've also got to do stuff. You've got a day job. Clients,
just some advertising to sell as well.
So it's an incredible opportunity for us.
Thank you. Well, I mean, it's inspiring to hear. And we've talked a bit about getting that macro view and taking learnings from other people, other organisations. It's inspiring to hear those examples. And again, I wonder if I could talk to you about Engine as well. I know you already referenced the fact one of your colleagues has set up that neurodiversity network. Could you maybe say a bit more about that? It's a whole other very interesting area.
Yeah, I mean, so I think as I was saying, it was Kim, who's our head of creative technology, set it up, and off her own drive and her own passion, and we supported that, and we've invested in it. I think one of the things that's interesting, just hearing SJ talk about the work Saatchi's have been doing, and I think that's actually one of the sort of happy byproducts of this drive, and the industry recognizing that we need to change from an inclusion perspective, is actually agencies realizing they can't just solve it on their own. And I think there is this sort of natural desire to kind of agencies, I think historically, because we're fiercely competitive and we've been fighting each other to win business for years and years, there's this sort of natural inclination that we go away and we'll solve it on our own. And I just think that this issue has forced the issue that it's impossible to solve on your own, and you have to work in partnership with others. And And I think, that's why we have been, from an engine perspective, we've really been building smaller but deeper partnerships with networks. I think when we first started out, there was a desire to partner with as many people as possible, and we've quickly realised that it's not as sustainable. So we've really kind of focused in on finding our key kind of really close partners that we've been having this sort of deep relationship with. So, networks like Brixton Finishing School, who are brilliant, massive shout out to them, who, we've been taking on. We've had 4 creative placements who have been brilliant this year. We've been working with Creative Equals, who, specifically really investing in their creative comeback initiative, which is all about giving women who are returning to the industry, that help and support in mentoring. So we've been providing mentorship, but also, investing in this as well. We're a firm believer of that. So, and as you mentioned, yes, we've got our neurodiversity network is the latest network that we've launched at Engine, but we've got a whole host of other networks from LGBTQ plus through to working parents, and we have those networks that give our employees that lived experience and that advice on the ground. I think the other thing to point out is that, and I'm glad SJ brought it up, because I'm a firm believer that this isn't HR's problem to solve, and I think there's this horrible sort of, lazy assumption that this is a problem that a certain section of agencies to solve it. It's not. It's a C-suite problem, and I think, from that perspective, it's C-suite, but it's a senior leadership problem. And, from a recruitment perspective, we've been upskilling the entire agency about how you hire, how best to hire, how you implement inclusive hiring training across the entire senior leadership team. So again, let's not just place this problem at the door of HR. And the other thing, and I think we talked about it at the start of this panel discussion, was transparency, and we're now voluntarily publishing our ethnicity pay gap reporting from the start of this year, alongside obviously our gender pay gap, but we believe it's equally important that we're publishing our data in this sense. So we need to be held to account publicly, and we're firm believers of that as well.
That's fantastic. And I mean, I'm just reflecting actually from a Kantar perspective, we use the same, approach to measure our own metrics around I&D. And we very much, came to the conclusion it is down to every single person in the agency actually to do things differently. Not that definitely obviously sits with the senior leadership without a question, setting the right tone and, making sure things are happening. But every individual can play a role in terms of how you make other people feel included in your company.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a really good point, actually. We're spending all this energy and all the enthusiasm for bringing an entry level. It's a terrifying place to come in. Amazing, but a terrifying place in agency. So even the most junior member of our agency can make those new kids feel good.
Exactly.
Everyone can play a role.
Exactly.
Yeah.
No, I selfishly could keep asking questions, but we are having some in from the audience. Okay. So if I may, for a moment, I will divert and ask those. So I have a question around the 3 key things that the census identified, Sharon, and the person's just wondering why gender wasn't in that list, just out of interest.
So there was a bit of a kind of managing the mood music in the industry, and those 3 things had come up when we were pitching this to industry and sort of getting buy-in from everybody. It was, I hope you're going to tackle the issue with black talent. I hope you're going to do the same for just, so those 3 kind of bubbled up anyway, and then the data absolutely supported it. What we've got to remember is that there's so much intersectionality in all of those, and so we are looking at that. And just to reassure whoever's asked the question, gender's in the next round of actions that we're launching before the end of the year. So what we did very quickly before we launched the findings was set up 7 satellite groups. So we've got a core group working on gender, one on Asian talent, disability, age, etc. And they'll be coming up with the actions for the next round. So we are tackling it.
I'm glad that we got the question then. You get the chance
Thank you for my little, get the messaging out there.
Your soapbox. So, and now I've asked a question, I've seen a flurry more come through, so everyone's like, oh, she is going to ask some questions, that's good. And I'll put this to you first, Sarah, because you, I think, were the first person to mention it, though everybody has. You mentioned that how it's a C-suite problem. and that need for upskilling. How do you do that in practice? Like, what would your tips be for engaging C-suite people in this area?
You've got to find the person with, if you're not in the C-suite, so if it's somebody not in the C-suite, going, how do I get my leadership to engage? There will be someone in the C-suite who is more engaged, warm to it, vulnerable to your conversation, who you've got to get some time with them, have a conversation, explain why this is so important, talk their language. This is someone who's really business driven. Explain to them the competitive advantage of leaning into diversity. Make sure it doesn't feel like, gosh, there's another 1,000 things I need to do. There's some brilliant, just first stage things that can happen. So just having a conversation like, we're not going to really know what our problem is unless we have the data. Data is the Trojan horse to getting diversity onto leadership's agenda, because once you've got the data, it's hard to hide from it. So on a really practical level, find the most warm, empathetic person on that leadership board, speak to them about it on a personal level, and just talk it on a human level. But if there's someone who's inspired by the business metrics, find the business story as well. There are some amazing books, very accessible books, TED Talks, lots of different ways you can get that leadership team engaged. And if you're already a leader, get it to the top of your board, to your board agenda. Start every meeting talking about talent and the progress you're making around diversity. Don't let it fall down the to-do list. And tell your clients, sorry, that's the other one. Tell your clients you're doing this. Nothing gets higher up the CEO to-do list, knowing that a client might ask about the progress next time they're having a cup of tea with them. So hopefully some practical ways in there.
That's a great point. And I mean, certainly we've seen, like, even through things like procurement, people asking us as a supplier those questions.
Yeah.
That's absolutely accelerated. Gen, would you have anything to add on that point?
I feel as though it would help us tremendously to have a change in the framing of the narrative, actually, to help push this agenda further. And I actually often feel as though diversity and inclusion can often feel as though it is just doing right by people, which it is 100% true, and I'm not saying that it's not doing that, but I actually think it would be helpful if we started reframing the narrative to that of doing right by business and doing right by organizational success, because inclusion isn't a tick box for HR. Inclusion's a proven driver of profitability, and I feel like we don't talk about this enough. I think there are a ton of reports, but to name just one, McKinsey obviously carried out. There was a study that was carried out a couple of years ago that found businesses with a high proportion of ethnic diversity at senior level are 35% more profitable than those companies that lack a diverse talent at top level. And I think, looking back even further, the McGregor Smith review from a couple of years back as well found that, from a UK perspective, if we were to help our black, brown, Asian counterparts progress in their career at the same rate as white people, we could add £24 billion to the UK economy each year. That's a huge amount of money. I think it's 1.5% of our GDP. We don't seem to be talking about these numbers enough, I don't believe. So I'm a strong believer that, it's not an HR nice to have, it's a foundation for profitability and growth for businesses and brands.
I think that's a fantastic point.
Well, I think increasingly people want to work for inclusive businesses as well, so they'll vote with their feet. We're finding that over the last couple of years, particularly coming into the industry, people want to work for a business that's got climate at the top of their agenda, and increasingly inclusion's up there as well. So, that's what I love about this campaign, was all about, the overarching ambition for it is that everybody in UK advertising feels they belong. And I think that innately brings everybody into it. Everyone's got a responsibility and a gain. So I agree with the C-suite down, but I also think, it's like everybody's got a part to play. Yeah. And we can use the sort of pandemic learnings, if you like, to really power that up, because we've all noticed each other in a different way. Recognised our sort of civic duty as well to sort of take care of everybody else. Yeah. So I think if we bring that into the workplace, it would be a really powerful outcome. Yeah.
And we do have quite a lot of questions. So I'm just also very conscious of time. One, I'll ask you a very specific one. specific TED Talks that you recommend that are good that people can use? Do you have any?
Yeah, do you know what? As I was saying it, I actually thought the best thing if you could do, there's a platform called the Human Library, which is an opportunity to get people from diverse backgrounds to talk one-to-one. And obviously with Zoom and stuff is an easy way of doing it. That's probably one of the most powerful things you could do. The Human Library is definitely something to look out for. And the great thing about TED Talk, go in and search. There'll be some amazingly powerful things in there. That would be an enjoyable afternoon, I reckon, finding a TED Talk to put in front of your CEO.
Absolutely. Okay, so we are sort of coming towards the end of time. So I just wanted to ask you guys, if I could ask you each in turn, like what are the key messages you would like people to take forward into their own organisations? What are the key learnings you've had from being involved with this work and various initiatives as well, and things that you would really like to see people take into their own organisations? Maybe I could start with you, Sharon.
Well, learnings from the overall, getting the census from a kind of scrap of paper to we have created a bit of a movement. I think that's what I would say is possible. And I think, again, with the pandemic backdrop, it's even more possible now. Get everybody involved, get them to see that there's gain for them too. Don't take no for an answer, I would say, is another. Sounds really obvious, but I've never worked. I mean, I'm a commercial director, so it's not been my space for a long time. But I'm passionate about it, and there's so much human behaviour that's about avoidance in this space. You'll sort of give them the data to support the problem, and they're like, yeah, but what about this? So I think just to keep everyone rooted on the issue at hand, baby steps, and just don't take no for an answer.
I like that. Sarah, what would you say?
I think I alluded to it earlier on. There are some amazing experts out there. This is a complicated theme. Find great experts, from finishing school, commercial break. These guys just know their stuff. A lot of them are grassroots or certainly small business, and they need investment. They can do things that we could never do. They are going to need a bit of money, so it can't be done for free. And super quick, we can't do any of this on our own, so steal stuff. The more we can replicate. So that's why I can't stress anyone who's listening wants to get involved with the schools programme. Let's just build out a curriculum so that teachers can be learning about all the great stuff we do.
That's fantastic. And Gen, could I come to you?
I would say don't be afraid to fail. I know it's such an important topic, and we need to get it right. But we're still at the early stages of this, and I think the more we try and test and learn, the better. And I completely agree with SJ. There's nothing wrong with stealing from each other. It should be, this topic needs to be open source in that sense. So I think the more we can share from our learnings, our failures as well, I think the better. Let's just keep the momentum going, because it's vital, as I said, for the future of this industry.
Absolutely, and I think it really chimes actually with the earlier session. We talked a lot about the need for peripheral vision, the need for looking to other sources for inspiration around how we can do things. I've picked up myself many things from the conversations I've had with you three already around things we can be doing differently and better at Kantar. And obviously at Kantar as well, we have the capability to measure for other people and give benchmarks and hopefully give guidance on how a company is performing on these issues, and hopefully give guidance on how they can improve in the future as well. So I think with just a minute so remaining, just to thank my panellists, Sharon and Sarah and Gen as well for joining us. It's been a fantastic conversation. Thank you. As you say, started a movement with All In, and that's absolutely brilliant. Looking forward to seeing what it brings over the next couple of years. And thank you as well for sharing so many inspiring stories about what we can all do differently and better. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.